Hey, everybody. Welcome to one of our first performance panel discussions, right? We're really excited for this feature. So the way that this is going to flow today is we've got loads of experience on this phone call. And today we're going to be talking about optimizing performance mindset within teams, which is definitely going to bring up lots of preconceived notions probably, but the people we have on this call, which I'm going to introduce in just a second, will definitely diversify that and really make it come to life in your world. So we're excited to do this. My name is Brent Callaway. I'm the director of pro sports here at Exos. I've been with the company since 2008. So if we have any program inside the company that revolves around the pro sports space, then that's my job to make sure that it operates well. That involves our off-season programs for NBA athletes, NFL athletes, Major League Baseball, our combine program, etc. So I'm a strength conditioning coach, and excited to be here. We've got some awesome people. I'm going to go to the wonderful Amanda Carlson first. Amanda's our SVP of Thought Leadership. She's been with the company since 2003, so she's definitely the one with the most Exos experience on this panel right now. But Amanda, let us know what a senior vice president of thought leadership does on a daily basis.
Well, like you, I've had a number of roles over those years, as you could imagine. But I started with Mark and Athletes Performance as the first dietitian. So I am the official OG nutrition lady, and I can't quite get away from that. I still love the nutrition perspective. But over the years, done a number of things like, helped to lead the research group, helped on the innovation side, helped with some analytics. So thought leadership is a combo of all of those things. So today I get to work with our research team, with our innovation side of the business, with all of our performance partners, and pull together some new thoughts around how the industry is moving forward and how Exos is playing a role in doing that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thanks for being on here with us. Stefan Underwood. Stefan is our Vice President of Staff Development and Methodology, and also a strength and conditioning coach himself. So, Stefan, tell us about kind of your evolution within a company and where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my evolution within the company has followed much the overall evolution of the company. So go back 10 years, we were much smaller. So I started on as a strength coach, like you said, working in our Florida facility down Gulf Breeze, Florida, attached to Andrews Institute. Ran our elite military program down there, as well as the movement coach for NFL Combine program. I spent 5 years in Florida doing that. And my whole background is in strength and conditioning, coming from working at the NSCA, working in college hockey. Came into Exos at the time, Athletes Performance, to run that. As you know, and Amanda knows, we've had just huge growth in that time. So what used to be organic development for coaches, it was us sitting around a coach's office, bullpen, just, talking. And that's where our continuous improvement will come from. As we grew exponentially in size, we needed to say, let's get a strategic vision for how we're going to help in the development of all of our coaches. So about 4 years ago, I stepped into a role that is overseeing our continuous improvement or internal education. And so that's where I now sit as those roles evolve. Current role is to oversee staff development and our methodology.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And bringing the deep strength conditioning and speed application and on-field movement aspect of things, man, you've done amazing things here. So appreciate your work.
Appreciate it.
Chris Bertram, the world famous Chris Bertram. Chris is brand new to our company, but man, are we excited to have him. So he's our new director of applied neuroscience, and he's going to be a kind of a center in what we're talking about today. But Chris, let us know where you've been and what you've been up to so far.
Yeah, so my life pre-Exos is at the university. I teach here, I do research, I get in the lab, and my world that I've explored for about 20 years has been in the skill acquisition domain. So how we get from where we are now to where we want to be, what happens in the brain and the body when those things come together, and then how we can optimize that process and get us from A to B as quickly and as seamlessly as we can. And so I've also, as a offshoot of that, gotten out of the lab, and I work with athletes and I work with coaches, trying to help them set up their learning environments to try to optimize them as well. And within the context of Exos and the director of applied neuroscience, my role really is to help build out some of that methodology that Stefan was talking about and help sift through some of what's out there in the the mind space, the brain space, what's
Yep.
good, what works, what doesn't. There's a lot of ideas floating around right now. Some of them are really interesting and exciting, others I think are a little bit understudied at this point. So I'm trying to figure out what's actionable for Exos folks and what we can use in the here and now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Chris, one of the things that I feel like as a strength conditioning coach, you've been helpful with me on, and we're going to talk about a lot of this today, is actually what the coach can do that feels very maybe non-traditional, right? So the traditional mindset piece or sports psychology piece has a lot of preconceived notions that come with it. But what we're going to talk about today is, and Stefan will give us a great lead into this, but how a coach can actually guide some of those pieces potentially without the athlete even knowing it, and what are the common traits of really great coaches that all of those pieces exist within just how they operate on a daily basis and how we can all be better. So
Absolutely.
Great.
I don't, when you mentioned, all the elements that go into that, and certainly psychology is a big part of it. I'm not a psychologist. That's not my world, but that's a really important piece of this whole thing. But there's more components to it, right? I mean, it's how we design programs. It's what we do within the programs. It's how we fuel the body. It's how we do all of these things, right? Those 4 pillars and how we integrate them. That's really the secret to leveraging the power of the mind in all of this.
Yeah. I mean, Brent, it's I think one of the things you said is there's a good chance that a lot of what we talk about, really expert coaches are likely doing some of it just on intuition and may not be realizing it. But as we look at trying to scale, like as we try to educate all of our coaches, right, we realized we can't just rely on senior coaches and intuition. We've got to be able to start really being intentional about things and putting a finger on it. So, I mean, you and I have had conversations before on like when you pull out video review during speed work for combine,
Sure.
right? Because we've all had that session where it's just flowing so well, it's going so well. You pull out the iPad and it can actually tank the session. Like it can fully just detract from the session versus, I know where I landed, at least my opinion as a coach, is separating that video review away from the actual skill acquisition of sprinting and just running sessions on the field, getting guys into that flow of the session. And then on a separate session, sitting down when the intent of that moment was video review. But we want to understand, like, why is that? And so where we're really excited to bring Chris onto the methodology team is to say, I want to know the answers to those questions. Because I think what really stood out to me, I knew Chris before we brought him on board. And one of the things, Chris had said that just really stuck out with me is talk to any athlete you work with and say, what percentage of success in your sport comes above the neck? And they will give you likely a very high percentage. And then you say, what percentage of your program or training intentionally focuses on what's above the neck? And you will likely get a very low percentage. And it's that disparity saying we need to close that gap. But to your point, it doesn't mean we need to start talking neuroscience to all of our athletes. There are some that may have a flavor for wanting to know that, right? But we know there's a lot of athletes that don't. There's things we've talked about you can just naturally put into the structure of your session where we are coaching it. It's part of the session intentionally without the athlete really even knowing it. I think that's the key.
Yeah, definitely.
And Stefan, I mean, just kind of like chiming in here, like how I get excited about the nutritional piece, and like I'm not taking video of people, eating their food or structuring the session, but I think that concept that would be weird. But the concept of how nutrition plays a role beyond just the physicality, and so how does nutrition play the role above the neck? And thinking of the most common training tables today, how might you maybe mix things up or provide a different context or perspective that brings a much more different level of awareness to the athlete? And really you're optimizing now beyond just the physical system, but also the mental system to unlock other levels of performance. So, I mean, from the movement to the nutrition to the mind, it is about above the neck and below the neck, but it's fun to talk about nutrition as it relates to above the neck.
Yeah. I think a key thing before we get going is, one of the things as we brought Chris on board that has really helped me, we've always had these 4 pillars: mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery, right? But mindset has probably had the least well-defined architecture to it. And one of the things that has really resonated with me is hearing Chris, I'm putting words in your mouth now, Chris, you can just jump in, but hearing Chris talk about the difference between mindset and mind state. And it's not to downplay mindset being, hold me accountable, Chris, right? But like your preconceived assumptions and beliefs, right? Like growth mindset versus fixed mindset. We've all heard about that. Understanding your core values. And that's important. It's not to downplay the importance of that in behavior upgrade, but that gets a bit squishy at times and comes with some preconceived baggage, Brent, as you alluded to. But there's this whole other conversation around state of mind state. Mm-hmm. And that's the neuroscience. That's am I in a meditative state? Am I in a sleep state? Am I in a flow state? Like, and what is an optimized state for learning and performance, and both in a game scenario and a practice scenario? Yeah. And that is something that coaches can very tangibly influence and toggle. And I think that's what's really exciting is we're not talking about sitting down and exploring the deepest, values of your athletes. Again, not diminishing that. That's important in relationship building. But we're talking about like tangible things that you can do inside a session to affect state of mind for an athlete so they perform their best. Right, Chris? I put words in your mouth. I'll shut up.
And as usual, you did as good or better job of getting words into my mouth than I can usually get in there. So thank you. Let me just circle back and just make sure that we're covering the bases here. So yes, you're right in drawing that distinction between the set of the mind, which is your basic beliefs about what you think you can do. And that matters. Your basic belief system about how much you can get out of your mind and body has a direct impact on what you will get out of your mind and body. We know that.
Yep.
That is it's been well researched, and there's a pile of evidence to support that. But beyond the set of your mind and your belief system, it's what you do with the state of your mind, as you talked about. So yes, the conversation of what states of mind are all about is a really interesting one, because as you said, it is something that we now know can be influenced, right? I mean, 20 years ago when I started in the academic world, all we would talk about is words like the zone, and knowing that, there is that magic that happens sometimes where everything just lines up and you get fairy dust sprinkled on you and away you go and you have the performance of a lifetime. But nobody knew what that was. There were no words to describe it. You ask somebody what it's like when they're in that zone and they just I don't know, it felt easy today. What can you do with that? And then we didn't have the imaging technology and the understanding of the brain at that time to give us anything to go on. The thing that's changed over the last 20 years, but especially the last 10, are these massive advances in neuroscience that have allowed us to peer underneath the hood of people when they are in this thing that we now call flow state. And once we understand those mechanisms, we can go in the back door and start pushing on some of those levers on purpose to try to push us into those states, because as you point out, that is where the fastest rates of learning happen. It's where those supercharged performances come out of nowhere. And it's where we feel the best too.
Yeah, I remember last year at our internal education summit, you made a statement to our coaches. You said, when you were presenting, you said, the rise of Superman is like table stakes reading for every coach, period. So I went out, read it, agree with you, phenomenal. I think one of the things that stood out a lot to me was the statement that every single sports championship in history was won in a state of flow. And so if we're talking about, we're working with athletes, we want to get the most out of them, both in that session for practice, for training, whatever it may be, or them on whatever day, whatever sport, Saturday, Sunday, whatever level you're coaching at, when they hit the field. We've got to know a little bit about flow state.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, and it's where we normally talk about flow state is in the arena, right? On game day. Like, how do we get people into that place so that they can draw out these amazing performances? But the thing is, we can also leverage that same system within a training environment, because that's where the biggest gains happen. It's where the behavioral change too, just being interested and motivated to get after it in those settings where sometimes you might not otherwise be that way every single day, right? So we want to maximize the time that we spend with athletes in any environment so that we're getting the most out of it. And the training environment is no different.
Yep. Chris, I'm a coach, right? So how do I do that? What are some of the key things that I can do inside of, I got a team training that's going on. how do I set that up? Like, what's the base level of things that I can start implementing right away that make the biggest difference?
Yeah, so that conversation generally focuses on what we call flow triggers. So, how can
Yep.
you set somebody up and start pushing on those flow triggers that we now know are pretty well identified, and then start stacking flow trigger on top of flow trigger? And the more you can do that, the more likely it is that you're going to predispose somebody to falling into a flow state. This is not a game of perfection here. This is about stacking the deck and stacking triggers so that you can increase the probability of somebody's mind being in that state. So, topic of flow triggers. One of the easiest ways to do this, and one of the first, if you ever look this up and the list of flow triggers, I think we have 22 identified now. One of the first ones that shows up is a clear goal, a clear, unambiguous goal. What are we doing today? What are we doing right now? When there's confusion there, think of any time you've ever been in a meeting, right? You show up, you're sitting there for 20 minutes and you think, I have no idea why I'm here right now. Because usually people don't start meetings and say, this is what we're going to get out of the next 25 minutes. Here's our goal.
Yep.
Here's where we're going today. As soon as you set that, great, I'm on board. Now I can at least have a better chance of finding my own individual flow or contributing to group flow, right? When you have a common shared goal, that contributes to some group flow. So beyond that, it's about, thinking of other triggers like new experiences, making sure there's an adequate amount of challenge there, right? Challenge to skills. There's this challenge to skills ratio that we really need to pay attention to so that we're pushing people, but not too far, right? Gets them into this thing called the flow channel, more likely to get there. So really it comes down to identifying what triggers are in your environment and what we can do to push on those triggers and start stacking them up.
Yeah.
Clear goals. Oh, sorry, Brent.
No, you're good. You're good. I was going to go the same direction as you are, Stefan. And I think that every good coach is going to walk out there and say, hey, guys, here's what we have today.
Right now.
And you're going to lead in with that session or lead into that session with here's the target. Here's what we got, right? And here's what I'm going to put on you. And here's how you're going to have to handle it. Here's what you'll feel. And here's how you power through that, right? So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, well, and I was going to add one thing he said in there that I really like. Chris, you talked about group flow versus the individual flow. So like this idea of a group collaborative, right? So we've got a team session. Hey, fellas, like this is what we have right here today. This is what we have to get out of this training session, elicit group flow. But it sounds like knowledge of results and how I then coach the individual. So it's almost like, Brent, you think of correcting movement. We talk about global cues and local cues. Globally, How do I get group flow going? This is clearly what this session's about. But then on the flip side of that, how do I then have my individual interactions? That as I go up to one person, Brent, giving him a clear, ambiguous goal for what he needs on his next rep, or giving him clear knowledge of results. Because it's about, you said, giving them just that little bit, 2, 3, 4% improvement, not shooting for the stars, but also not giving them something that's easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And by the way, even two people counts as a group, right? You can, as a one-on-one, that's just this really small group. Like you think of like, where does that show up? You think of a really good conversation you have with somebody, all the characteristics of group flow show up even in that environment. So when you're working one-on-one with somebody, it still is a version of group flow. You're trying to get one person into that flow state at that point. But you're right, how you do that and how you manage those interpersonal interactions and those cues. You talked about knowledge of results, giving somebody information about how to improve, and how and when you do that is really, really important. And I think, you mentioned something at the start of this conversation that great coaches have that intuition. Well, I agree with that to a point, because some people really are doing the right thing by chance, as it turns out, and aligns nicely with what the research would suggest. But I think a lot of other people just sort of do things because that's the way their personality is set up, or that's the way they were taught. And some of those things are actually counter to what the research would suggest you do. So a really easy example of that is in the idea of like, how often should you give somebody feedback? Do a rep, get some feedback. Do a couple of drills, get some feedback. Well, I can tell you some things about that, right? One of the, the original studies on this looked at, if you give somebody feedback after every single trial, by the end of the session, they're going to be doing really, really well, versus a group that maybe gets their feedback cut in half and tapered over the course of the exact same session. By the end of the session, that group who's getting their feedback taken away, they're not getting as much information, is not doing as well. But here's the thing. You bring them back the next day and you see how much learning has actually happened, how much skill acquisition is actually consolidated in the brain. And it's always the group that had their feedback taken away the day before. They're the ones that show up the next day with the change in behavior, whereas the other group can't do it as well because the coach has essentially become the crutch at that point.
Because coaching is learning. You've got to solve a problem. And so if you create a coach, I mean, we talk about that a lot, Brent, in our coach education. If you create a coach dependency, you fail them, right? Like Combine, you and I have had this conversation, but I remember an intern came up to me one time toward the end of Combine. I was like, Coach, you feeling burnt out? I said, no, why? So, well, like at the start of this, you'd so adamantly, like you really coach the heck out of movement prep. And on that particular day, we're, a week out from Indy, it was, fellas, you got 20 minutes to run as fast as you can, go. And I'm sort of standing on the side and he's like, it feels like you're over it. And I was like, no, but am I allowed on the field with them in Indianapolis to warm them up? Like if we've gone to this place where they need me to help them run fast, like that just pads my ego, but it absolutely does nothing to support them when they need to go perform,
Yeah. No, you're right on. Amanda, I see you're like furious taking notes over there and you're about to drop some knowledge bombs on us. But what fueling, nutrition plays a gigantic role in this. Let us know where.
Well, yeah, I am, because I think, the role as a sports nutritionist or playing the nutrition role on an integrated team like this is really understanding like what's happening during the sessions. Like what is the athlete preparing to do and how do we create nutrition programs or, how do we create, like I mentioned at the beginning, those nutrition environments that are going to support that. And so I think, we've been talking about this for 15, 17 years, as long as I've been in this role and doing sports nutrition. It is about fueling the body. And so I think as we evolve now, it's about fueling the body, because if your body's not fueled, you can't, tap into this higher level of performance or this flow state because you're worried because your body feels like shit, like you can't actually physically perform. So that's kind of table stakes at this point. And I think the systems out there to make sure that people have enough energy, they're getting the protein to recover. Those things are, I think, established well-known knowledge. But the true unlock now, from my perspective, is really thinking about what does it take to fuel above the neck. And one of the areas that is one of the biggest contributors to that is the gut. And so what people don't realize is or they do, and I think the science is really catching up, whether it's the neuroscience research or the gut specific research, but that the gut is one of the main sources for where so many different neurochemicals are being produced. And it's actually, playing a major role in the neuroendocrine system. And so what that means for the athlete who wants to be able to show up for that particular session, a lot of that activity has gone beyond the physical and into the brain. And so if we know that, like for instance, serotonin is a very specific neurotransmitter, but 95% of it is produced in the gut. And so if we're not protecting our gut and we're not thinking about the gut and its role in not only physical, but mental and cognitive performance, we're leaving something on the table in terms of being able to really show up for that session. So like, as I kind of think about the novelty of where performance and sports nutrition can go next, it's beyond, hey, white rice or brown rice. It's like, well, what's going to be the right rice? What's going to be the right rice that like unlocks this whole other level of performance? And so, really thinking about the environments and the systems to make sure that your athletes are thinking about nutrition in a different way and starting with the gut.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was going to say, Amanda, like that's so critical because we haven't really talked a lot about what is going on under the hood when flow state comes around. But long story short, much of it is a neurochemical process, right? And chemicals like serotonin are critical in that cocktail of neurochemicals that bathe the brain, that shift our state of consciousness into this high level of performance. And if we're not giving our body the right fuel to build the basic substrate of a flow state, well, good luck, right? And even if
Right.
we are and we're underhydrated and other things that are affecting our psychology, let's say, you just don't feel good in that moment because your body is not fueled and properly hydrated. Just that psychological experience can bump you out of flow state too. So again, this gets to this really important idea that all of these pillars are so tightly integrated if we really want to get the most out of ourselves, learn the quickest, perform our best, and feel our best.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
and one other thing, just last thing there, and not to get into the science now or like specific recommendations, but I think, from a nutritional perspective, we're always kind of looking for that new angle. What's the new angle that we can present this to the athlete that they haven't really heard about before, so that they become even more compelled to now connect, what they're eating with how they're performing in a different way. And so that's where, this can be another kind of tool for coaches to be able to compel their athletes to think about nutrition differently and really start to fuel in a different way.
Yep. Hey, quick question. All right, so let's make this applicable. I'm a strength coach and I'm at Washington State, or I'm at UCLA, or I'm at somewhere that might not have that big of a budget, right? I'm at Louisiana Tech, or I'm somewhere like that, right? So what are the questions? How do I get the train started when it comes to the nutritional aspect, Amanda? And like, what are the questions that I'm asking? Who am I asking them to? What's the base level of things that we need to start kind of pushing the button on?
Well, I think this is a really nice opportunity to really collaborate with the sports dietitian that you have within your staff. And what's so much different than 17 years ago when there are a handful.
Yep.
The majority of D1 and even D2 schools today have either a full-time dietitian or dietitians, and or some type of a consultant. So I think step one is partnering up with that sports dietitian to say, hey, like, maybe can we think about reframing some of this, the training table activity, or thinking about like this new concept around performance nutrition in a different way that the guys and the gals haven't heard before. So that's, it's kind of aligning conceptually is step one, and integrating, the strength coaches, the ATCs, the PTs, everybody's got to be on board. And so that's, like conceptual alignment. And then step two is around the education. It's like these foods are great for the gut. There's certain vegetables that have certain specific types of prebiotics. So onions, like wild blueberries, Jerusalem artichoke. I mean, people have never heard about that, but there is.
What is that?
I know, right?
Jerusalem artichoke?
What is that? It's almost like it's more of like a root type vegetable, actually. But the thing that's interesting about certain foods is that they have. We've all heard about fiber, but there's a very specific type of fiber called inulin, and that inulin is a prebiotic. And we've heard a lot about probiotics, but prebiotics are what all of that good gut bacteria like to eat. And so the whole point is making sure that the good bacteria are in the right balance within your gut with the bad bacteria. And so in that partnership with the dietitian, like really making sure that there are those kind of like pro gut performance foods in the training table, and you're educating the athletes against that. And in contrary, it's like, oh gosh, well, what are those foods that really, I don't want to hurt those good bacteria that are in there, like the good guys. Like, what are the foods that are really hurting the good guys? That's where you get in your highly processed foods. You got foods that have all kinds of artificial stuff in there. All of those foods are hurting your good bacteria. And so, it's kind of this whole new concept around, we've been fueling the body, but maybe we really need to fuel the gut. And if we can do that, create the education around that, we can create the environment around that, and it layers into the other parts of physiology and sports nutrition. But getting the gut in the right balance, getting the right bacteria there is going to help with these neurotransmitter productions. It's going to help with overall physiology. It's going to make sure you're absorbing the nutrients, and it truly creates that new foundation. And so this is really a whole systematic evolution to how you can utilize nutrition within your program in collaboration with neuroscience and ATCs, PTs, and strength coaches to get more out of the program.
Okay, I got a timeout real quick. You said fast food is hurting my gut, and Chris is telling me that my gut fuels flow. Is fast food interrupting my flow state?
Yes.
And I'm training her.
Come
on, really?
Yes, it's affecting it's going to negatively impact your flow. Now, you can probably, if you are a master, and I think you are, Brent, and you can probably get into that flow state one time, then you can kind of work around the system. But like high performance as we know it is not just being able to get into flow once. Like we want to be able to perform and tap into that high level of mental and physical performance time and time again. And your ability to do what Chris is talking about consistently and having that sustainable high level performance is all based on, the physiological base that you got to tap into. So fast food once, maybe not an issue. But if you're constantly going through the drive-through at Wendy's, I think it's going to be a problem for your flow state.
I got a question.
If I'm a college coach, that's what my kids eat, right? So I got to give some education around that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
You got to educate.
Well, so that's my question. Education, reframe the training table, partner with your dietitian. Food isn't just fueling the body. We're setting the environment to get the brain where it needs to be for you to have the state that you need to win championships. I get that. What are the simple things, though? Because I'm sitting here, like, I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And then I'm thinking of the athletes I've worked with and a conversation around you need to eat Jerusalem artichoke and kimchi and fermented food. And it ain't happening. There's no way that's happening.
It's
so like, how do you bridge that where it doesn't go to like even down to like wild blueberries? Does that mean that non-wild blueberries don't do the same thing? I often wonder that, right? Like,
there's different components, but blueberries, I think, it is providing the education and the awareness to the athlete and then making it as real as possible for them. And I think in today's environment, we can control the training table and you can control the fueling station. And so I'm not saying be like covert about it, but provide the education. I don't know one athlete that hasn't experienced flow state. They haven't had that game where they were on it. Yep. And so if you can match that feeling with like how people decide to choose their foods, I don't know very many athletes that wouldn't take a little pause to be like, this is not going to help me feel like that time when I caught that pass and I didn't even know what I was doing.
I think that's the key part attached to that flow state, like starting with the flow state. Like you felt amazing when it clicked, like that moment it clicked when you're in the zone, as Chris said, like as it would have been called.
Yeah.
Let them know that what you're eating has an effect on your ability to reach that. And then bringing back to Chris in the session, Brent, I don't know if you know, Chris wearing multiple hats. He actually, one of his official titles with his consulting work is flow coach with Canadian Olympic snowboard team. There's tangible things. What a great title. I want to be a flow coach. That's perfect. Like there's tangible things you can do.
Yes. And, I think when we talk about it a lot, we spend time, there's technology that we can use. There's, certain toys and tricks and nootropics and other things. But, the basics, getting your nutrition right is if you don't have those basic building blocks and substrate for flow state, well, good luck, right? It's just not going to be there, at least not reliably there. And that's, as Amanda was saying, that's the game we're playing here, right? How do we stack the deck? How do we get the probability of tipping the scale in our favor in those moments when we're looking for it? And it's not all Jerusalem artichokes. It's not always what you're putting in. The control too is sometimes what you just take away, right? Like just not having as many of those foods that are going to kill the bacteria you need to start that process. It's a subtractive process as much as an additive one, I think, from the nutritional side too.
And so if we stack the deck nutritionally, we step into a session ready to go. If we have time, Brent, I'd love to talk about like practical things we can do in the session. Like Chris and I have had conversations on the structure of your session, what you're doing in warm up, like more than just clear, unambiguous goals. Like how do we then stack the deck? If I think of my session structure, because flow as well, it's not a binary thing. It's not flow, no flow. Like it's a continuum, macro flow, micro flow. So we might not achieve the same flow state we achieve if someone is base jumping, but there can still like a 10 out of 10, like supercharged adrenaline, your snowboarders hucking themselves off the side of a mountain, but running a linear speed session that has some skill acquisition around sprint mechanics we can still get micro flow, get into a group flow where we're a 3 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10 and drive learning, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Flow is not one thing. It is those amazing moments, those magical performances, those championship moments and gold medal performances. That's part of it. And that's a great part of it. But it's also on a bit of a spectrum of experiences, right? It's like there's an emotional component to flow. And just like, any emotion, you can be a little bit happy, or you can be really ecstatic, or you can be really pissed off, or just a little bit agitated. Flow is similar to that. Like, you can be in versions of flow state. And the great thing is, we know that those gains in learning and progression and performance can happen even with the dial down at around 3 on the flow volume meter, right? So that's something to recognize and know, that we're not chasing the peak state in the training environment. We're just trying to raise the bar a little bit, trying to raise the probability. And so you're right. It's not.
Yeah. What does that? Let's talk not game day. Let's talk training session for a minute. I'm a strength coach, got a session coming in. Let's go with that linear speed day as an example. So what stacks the deck?
So, okay.
Clear, unambiguous goal.
We talked about the flow triggers, but there's also something to maybe mention here too, is that flow doesn't just kind of happen. Usually comes as a part of a cycle that starts with a bit of struggle. Then there's a release that drops you into flow. And then there is necessarily some recovery that has to happen on the back end so that we can set ourselves up for new struggle. Now, sometimes that all happens really fast. You mentioned snowboarders, they drop into a great big jump. That struggle, release, flow, recovery all happens within 30 seconds. But in most cases, it's protracted. It's a bit longer of a process, right? And the struggle can be very real and long, right? So if you can design a program on purpose, and I know we've talked about this, where you encourage some struggle in the early going, build in a bit of time for release and rest and relaxation, and that can set up the conditions for a flow state. And that can be a part of your program design. So what does that suggest to you, Stefan? I know that we've talked about how you can do that in a real world way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a simple addition. If you look at, so let's say we're working on this linear speed session. Classically at Exos, we would have talked about going through sort of from technical work into pre-programmed work into like application. But the problem is there's not really struggle in the technical or the pre-programmed. So what it tells me as a coach, I can think of things that are safe but intentional struggle, competition, whatever it may be, that as we come through our movement prep, our warm-up, drop in an intentional block that has a struggle, right, on the front end, then run through my technical and pre-programmed will serve as that release, because that's easy, right? Like, that's not hard. And then drop into clear, unambiguous goal. We got to roll. Timing gates are out. We're sprinting. Let's roll, and put them on the line and just see that session just get into flow. That's sort of what comes to mind for me. I'm curious what Brent's thinking, but I mean, that idea of having struggle on the front end to then have your easy work to then get into your application, I think is something every strength coach could have ideas for.
Yeah. And I think that there's, you got a balance between like metabolic stress load and mechanical stress load that you're about to drop on somebody, and then, oh yeah, go get underneath the squat bar, so that's going to be where probably the art of some of those things comes in.
But struggle can be cognitive struggle, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Like if we have something I'm thinking something team related on the front end where there's some problem solving and what they've got to do, and they start competing against each other at the tail end of my movement prep. So there could be some cognitive struggle. They got to solve a problem. They're working as a team. They're competing. It doesn't have to be physical, like super hard physical metabolic struggle, right, Chris?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it just has to be something that your brain is, kind of having to work through, and it's not an easy process, right? And then, we all do this. You have a brainstorming session, for example, right? It's a battle. Like your mind's kind of, just locked in, and you can't quite figure it out. Then you walk away and you start walking around. And you start having that hallway conversation with somebody. That's enough release where all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's what I meant to say over there. That's where the flow happens. So it's precipitated by some struggle. Then there's some release, and that's where the flow starts to happen on the back end of that. So in the physical domain, you've given some really nice examples of that. And the thing I like about it is, the athlete is none the wiser to this. It's just part of the program design that is built in to encourage a better probability of finding some flow within the training environment.
All right, so I'm brainstorming in my head while you're talking, Chris, and you too, Stefan. But if I am leading into this session, we're going through warm up, right? We're out on the field, we're going through warm up. I've I got my whistle, and we're hitting all of our dynamic stretches. We're warming up. Is it okay for me to challenge the athletes with where we weren't good yesterday? Is that enough of a struggle that now we can focus up and talk about what we have to do today? Here's our goals for the next session, and you got 5 minutes to get your mind in the right spot. Go change your shoes and let's go to work.
Yes, I think. Well, number one, you've introduced something really clear. Like, we're talking here about the things we didn't do well yesterday. So that's where we're at in our heads, right? We got a very clear idea, so that's good. Need that. Plus, we're going to get right after that, the start of the session. So that's where we're going first. So that's going to encourage some struggle, most likely. There are other things and other tools that we could talk about along the way that can help prime the brain, right? And things that we can do more from sort of a mental flow warm up. And those are activities that I do with some of the athletes that I work with. But in the short answer to that is, structurally, that all makes really good sense to me. It's keeping in mind, though, you don't want to keep the struggle for too long. You have to build in some time for that release, and then expect that you might be able to get back to it. So if you want to do that hard thing where there was struggle, great, do that. Give something else to do, and then maybe revisit it again. Go back to those drills and see if there's any change there. And as a coach, like, look, we talk a lot about feeling the need and the imperative of embracing that struggle is the way forward, right? Nobody likes that. Like, sure, in certain parts of our life, we enjoy that struggle, right? But in other parts, we don't. And the athlete themselves won't necessarily be enjoying the struggle because there will be some failure involved. And the coach may be sitting there saying, I don't really like seeing this either because I don't feel like I'm instructing well enough.
Yeah.
Both sides of that equation need to get more comfortable with the idea that struggle is okay. And it's actually more than okay. It's necessary. It's where learning and development happens. And it's also a precursor to flow. So we all need to just change our mind about how we view struggle in the first place. And then we can just get intentional about going after struggle, but then giving some time and space for release, which can lead into flow.
Brent, that's one of the biggest things I learned from the tactical population working. One of the biggest differences I'd say between the tactical population and many of the athletes I worked with, I would say the tactical population, a much higher percentage, embraced failure and saw failure as an opportunity to learn, and would always debrief after action reviews. Like, they'd nonstop be, okay, what can we do better? A lot of athletes, I won't put a percentage on, but a lot of athletes, the special ones, absolutely embrace struggle the same way. But a lot of athletes I've worked with, I'm sure the same way, they tend to avoid the shit they're not good at. Like, they want to stay in their comfort zone where they can look good and perform well. And if that's a weakness for me, I don't want to be exposed. So I don't want to do that. And so I think it's a huge opportunity to reframe that kind of a struggle too. Of like, no, like, man, you're at a fork in the road right now. You're not good at it. You have an opportunity to learn something and get good at it. That's the happy path that leads you to being better at what you're trying to do. Or you can just continue to avoid it, and you're leaving money on the table, and you got a gap in your game. Right.
I've got a question. Yeah, I've got a question for Chris. Like, as you talk about struggle, like, I'm just really interested in this, especially in relationship to the training session. Is it like a physical struggle, or are we talking like maybe can you create like a mental type of struggle, like a wonder, trying like math problems? Like, is something like that able to trigger into the flow, or is it really just a physical challenge?
Well, I would say that the shorter way to do it is with physical work. Like, here's an example. We know that 4 to 6 minutes of really intense exercise can trigger the start of a flow state. It can make your brain actually change in what's active and what's not. You can do the same thing in about 18 to 20 minutes of really mild to moderate exercise. If you want to get there the fastest, like, just, challenge anybody just to do burpees for 5 minutes. It will be a struggle, but on the back end of it, you will feel a bit of release. And in 30 seconds after that, you're going to feel supercharged. Like, it actually changes the state of your brain. If we're doing cognitive things, it can be a bit of a longer, more arduous struggle, but that's part of the work that we all have to do. But it's there. It's all, the cycle is still there. It's just, I think in the training environment, we want to try to cycle through that as quickly as we can and get the most out of the time. So I would say the shortcut is through some pretty intense work early on.
And like everything in coaching, it's the Goldilocks principle, right? We do too intensive work, my skill acquisition probably just got shot.
Yeah.
Don't do enough, I don't get into flow state. Same as like the cognitive, if there was a cognitive challenge, right? Do it, get in, great. If I do too much, I know you can point to research that shows that that's going to increase rate of perceived exertion, and actually like that cognitive
Yes.
load and cognitive fatigue will actually decrease performance as well. So like everything in coaching, Goldilocks principle, right? We're not trying to just smash our, athletes in the opening 5 minutes to say, well, we're inducing flow, and then see the shittiest sprint session we've ever seen, or
Yeah.
the most pulled hamstrings we've ever had in a session.
Yeah.
You got to be intelligent about it. Got to be intelligent.
The devil's in the details here, and you're absolutely right, Stefan. There is an optimal challenge that we're looking for, and that is where the blend of the science comes around with the art of the actual person doing the coaching and some experience there. But yeah, we can't go too far. But I think most people tend to err on the side of not doing enough, quite honestly. Like, I think we really need to change our attitude about, you know what, I see that struggle going on right now. I see some failure going on right now. And you know what? Good. Because that's the group that's going to show up tomorrow with the knowledge clearly consolidated in their brain.
Yep.
Brent.
Okay. Yep. So we're starting to run a little bit short on time, but I've like writing list of questions that I want to talk to you about, Chris. So let's hit a few and then we'll wrap up. But I'm thinking about the struggle. I'm thinking about flow. I'm thinking about what I have to do for the session. Where does my energy as a coach and my feedback fit in? Like, does my energy need to be out the roof? Do I need to be quiet and subdued? If I play that in different directions, am I the bipolar coach? Where does all of that fit into the situation? Should I be screaming all the time? How do we do this?
Yeah, I think, to me, really, I think this is where a psychologist would really have a lot to add to this conversation. But my take on it is this. I mean, I think we have to be who we are first and foremost, right?
Absolutely.
Don't be somebody who you're not, because that just comes off as inauthentic, and then that's the
100%.
bullshit meter goes up. And I think you be the person, first of all, your personality that is authentic to you. And then when you're in that moment, just keep in mind those principles of, okay, giving people information is helpful, but you don't want to become the crutch. That's regardless of the tone that you take when you deliver the information. I think, look, you're a pretty hyped up guy, Brent, right? You would be in there getting people charged up and fired up. I'm a little bit more low key. I deliver the message. I think we can both deliver it in the same kind of way that we know is, going to get us where we want to go the most quickly. But I don't think it necessarily has to be somebody who's yelling in your ear. Look, if you're really going for it, like that kind of motivation through like really intense feedback can be powerful and useful. There's a time and a place for that. I think it really just comes down to knowing who you are, knowing what should be done structurally, and then just using your voice however you think you best can. That's my tip. I don't know what it looks like.
And Brent, Brent, one of the things we talk about all the time with our coaches, right, is that how to not become the crutch. And not even in the context of flow, right? But like, ask a question after a rep, right? Like, how many coaches feel the need to give feedback on every rep or all the times that they're the expert? And me, early in my career, that was me. Like, someone would sprint and I'm going, this is what you need to do next time. Or this is what we saw that we need to correct. Here's a cue for it. Like, we love pulling out our cues from our toolkit. And there's so much more power in being like, how'd that feel for you? Right. And I think the biggest thing I'll say is the athlete will know when it feels like shit. And they'll know when it feels good.
Yeah.
Yep.
The rare occasions where they don't know if it was good, that's when they need you as a coach. And when it feels like shit, the next question is, okay, if you know what you want to do next time, like, they've got an internal dialogue going. They know what they want to correct. Me adding words could be problematic. So it's, hey, okay, so you know it was bad. Do you know what you want to try differently next time? And again, if they go, no, I know it felt awful, but I don't know what to do about it, then it's time to coach. If they go, yeah, I know exactly what I'm going to do. Let them go. Let them solve the problem on their own. Go fix it.
Because, when we talked about, when you take away somebody's information and you're not becoming the crutch, what you're forcing them to do, I think, at least theoretically, is to solve the problem themselves, right?
Right.
And that's where they own the solution. And that's where real learning happens. That is stress resistant and shows up when you're not there. But I think you can do more. And your suggestion is absolutely bang on. Actually prompt the question. Like, get them being reflective. Yep. Do they have an answer? Because that can give you some goalposts around, well, is this a good time to interject with some feedback of my own? Or is this the one, what they just replied to that question is exactly what I have said. So I can just back off and let them figure it out. Because that's how you're going to move the needle.
Yep.
So
when I'm coaching, Stefan, I'm sorry, but Stefan and Chris, so when I'm coaching, I ask those questions a lot, right? So tell me about that rep, right? Or tell me about that set or whatever the case was. They talk me through it. I want to hear their words. I want to hear how it makes sense in their mind. And then I can change my words to match their words. They don't have to think in my terms. I want to think in theirs, right? And then when I see the correction on the other side, that's like one of the biggest endorphin releases for me as a coach. That's where I feel like I get in a flow. And then I'm exuberant. Sometimes I feel like my energy goes over the top, right? Because I see the athlete fix something. And then that's when I am probably too positive, too energetic in my reward on that. But what effect does that have on the athlete? Is it good? Is it embarrassing? I don't know. But
look,
where does that go?
I believe that stuff is contagious. There's actually some interesting science around mirror neurons and how we can pick up on somebody else's energy and flow state. Even it's not like I wouldn't like hang my hat on that, but I do believe, like, to a point, that kind of attitude is contagious, and they sense your positivity, and that can be a really powerful tool, I think, for people too. So I would never suggest you change the way you are authentically, Brent.
PRs lead to other PRs, don't they? Right?
They do. Can I ask one? Do you have time for one question? I want to tie back to at the very beginning. I talked about that idea, Brent. You and I have had conversations around video feedback. Chris, you made a comment to Amanda of saying it isn't just what you put in. Sometimes it's what you cut out. So same as there's flow triggers, there's flow blockers, right? And so I want to hear about behaviors a coach might inadvertently be doing that is blocking flow from happening. We've already sort of talked about over coaching, and I think maybe defining flow as part of defining flow is shutting off executive function. So anything that induces too much thought, any over coaching is going to be a flow blocker, I assume. And maybe tying it back to my opening comment on when video feedback comes in, because we tie it all together. I just anecdotally, Brent, I had the shittiest sessions when I pulled the iPad out for video. It just seemed to just suck guys into the video, and it overcoached them because even without me saying anything, just too much for them to look at. So separating that away to a standalone session also gave me my chance to educate while we're doing, because now I'm not asking them to perform a skill. So I can educate while we're watching video, which I found in a loop. Now, when I'm in a session, I ask them, how did that rep feel? I started getting more valuable answers.
Right.
I want to hear about video feedback or other flow blockers, and where does video play in skill acquisition in your mind in the weight room?
Yeah. So, again, like the intuition there is bang on, actually. I can tell you, I actually did research in this area for a while, and my intuition, and this is a great, like, call out on myself. I had the opposite intuition, because back when, video cameras started to become a little bit more accessible and Dartfish came on the scene, everybody was rushing out to get a camera, some Dartfish software, and a laptop to just start filming it. This is even before cell phone cameras were very good. And I thought, this is amazing. Like, I was one of the people, I was an early adopter of this. And so I thought, there's nothing in the textbooks here about skill acquisition and video feedback. I'm going to do the study. So I got a group of people. I'll do this really quick. Here's what it was. 3 groups of people trying to learn a task. It was actually a golf task, if you're curious. But they're trying to get better at this one element of swinging a golf club. And one group got no feedback at all. They just tried to get better all by themselves. Second group had a coach giving them some scripted feedback intermittently throughout their training session. And the third group had the same coach, but we supplemented it with video every 5th trial, right? So now that group's getting everything. Great, good, got some data, analyzed the data, came back, and here's what it showed. The group that was trying to get better all by themselves didn't really manage that.
Thank God we still all have jobs.
Right.
That's right.
I thought you were going to say that was the best group, and I was just going to go start laying bricks.
I was just going to go get my golf club outside and try to get better.
So continue.
Even better, coach. The group that had the coach got significantly better, right? Coaching, verbal coaching, and giving that feedback helped. Now, take that same coach, supplement it with the video. Here's what happened. They got worse. They got worse not only than they did at their pre-test, they got worse than the control group who had nothing at all. So effectively what the video did, not only did it not make them better, it actually effectively erased the effect of the coach that we'd already demonstrated was helpful. So that brings about this idea of, paralysis by analysis, and are we really blocking and interrupting their ability to learn and maybe get into flow state? that study was done 10 years ago. I can tell you there's been nothing really that's come out to refute that study in the 10 or so years since it did. They have shown that over time, if you use it more like, intermittently over a longer time course, there can be some value there. But I can tell you this, it's a watch out, because the athletes I work with, the cameras are out on everything now. Those cameras are so good. You can get analysis software on your iPad, your iPhone. I'm not suggesting there's not a time and a place. The way that you suggested, maybe have a standalone session where you can sort of curate what it is they see. I don't think they need to see everything. That can be really good information for your eyes as a coach. Maybe they don't need to see all of it, but where it can be useful in a standalone session, that might be the way forward. But it's not. I just caution people against a blanket, because we can measure it, we should approach.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
a jump inside my office real quick, and I want to show you something on this on a film from earlier today. Right, that's still okay, but pulling out the maybe the camera and the big screen and stuff like that while we're in session, or pulling out my phone and showing a rep might not be the way to go.
Might have the potential to disrupt flow state and learning. Yeah.
Hey, stop. Hey, come look at this. Check this out. Right. That's what everybody's doing. I'm like, well, all that does is get me thinking. And we know that thinking in and of itself is a bit of a flow blocker. So once you get moving, once things start to feel automatic, the last thing you want to do is jump in and mess that up.
That's it right there, right? Thinking isn't part of flow. Like when athletes talk about, listen to the way athletes talk about when they're in, like they're unconscious. A dude was unconscious, right? Like it happens. You aren't thinking about it.
That's why this phone was such a useless tool, because tell me what that was like today. Well, I don't know. There's no words, because that part of their brain that is doing that conscious thinking is not really present when you're in a flow state. So your ability to recall the details of it really go down. That's one of the hallmarks of athlete performance. But ask them what happened when they had a bad day. You can sit down and prepare yourself for a blow-by-blow retelling of the entire thing. Because what was happening there? Their brain was involved in all the wrong ways. They were thinking while performing. They were not in that automatic flow state. So they can recall the details with much more precision.
So Brent.
You go first, Stefan. I just had an epiphany. I mean, I think I was in flow.
I got to hear an epiphany.
I was in flow for a second while you guys were talking.
I want to hear that. I was going to wrap stuff up. I was going to sort of summarize things of what as this coach I'll take. I need to hear your epiphany.
Amanda, go.
This is all what I love about this stuff. But you guys are talking about coaching. You're coaching the athletes from a physical standpoint, from an intercession standpoint, and it's like all of you guys as coaches have the opportunity to nutritionally coach as well. And so I think the theme here that we can build upon, and I can't wait to work on this more with you guys. But it's like fueling your flow. And so like the nutrition aspect of this is fueling your flow. Show up to your session prepared. You're hydrated, you've recovered after your last session physically, like you're ready to go. And then you are thinking about things, throughout the rest of your day or whatever. But I think from a nutritional aspect, it is about fueling your flow and how we do that.
What a great hashtag you just came up with right there.
That's it right there.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, if I'm like as a coach sitting here of like what I take away and just the conversations I've had with Chris and Amanda, like if I were to summarize for every coach listening, read The Rise of Superman, start understanding flow more, or the original book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and just see if you can say his name. Flow is real, right? It's on a continuum, and it's where we get optimal learning and performance. Fuel your flow. So you're stacking the deck, talk with your dietitian, and reframe the conversation around gut health so it isn't this out there thing, but it directly links to a feeling of when you've performed your best as an athlete. Now that you've stacked the deck, come into your sessions, set clear, unambiguous goals at the start of the session. Know that struggle is part of it. So that moment that gets muddy when someone's really struggling with something and they're about to get pissed off or they're about to throw a fit because they're really struggling through it, let that go a little bit. Like realize that struggle is part of it and recognize that struggle, release, flow. Let them struggle, get them to walk away for a minute, go get a drink, reframe, come back, and then just see them drop into flow to execute. And then know that there's flow blockers too. And so avoid overcoaching, too much feedback, and the biggest debate amongst some of our coaches, I'm going to go tell them that I win, even though I'm sure it's not that black and white, and say, get the video feedback off of this session if you want to see flow happen. Put it at a separate time, standalone. Hey, come in my office. Let's talk through this and educate, but avoid overcoaching. Don't be the crutch, and know that video feedback in the wrong moment can block flow. That's what I hear as a coach sitting there. And Brent, I just get so excited about all that.
Pumped.
I think that gives me stuff for days to put in the program.
For sure. Not only do I get pumped by that, but you crushed the wrap up. So nice job. Nice job. You guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. This was awesome. Like I could do this every day. It was fantastic. Thanks a bunch. Yeah, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you later on.
Thanks, BC.
Hi, Brent.
See you guys.